They laughed as he limped forward, his hands trembling. But a few seconds later, no one was laughing anymore. The smell of gun oil and cordite clung to the air inside the training range. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting pale shadows across the concrete floor. Recruits crowded behind the benches, loud and restless after hours of marksmanship drills, the kind of atmosphere where one mistake became everyone's entertainment. Lane 12 was empty until he appeared. He wasn't fast. Every step carried a drag, the heel of his left boot scraping slightly as if his body argued with him about moving at all. His shoulders were broad but slumped, his uniform, plain civilian range gear with a faded patch barely visible on the sleeve. His right hand shook faintly as it carried a pistol case. "Is he lost?" one recruit muttered under his breath. Another smirked. "Looks like he wandered out of the VA and ended up here." The man didn't respond. He reached the bench, set down the case, and opened it. Inside lay a Colt .45, old but immaculately maintained. The grip bore the shine of decades of use, steel edges worn smooth by hands that had carried it longer than anyone in the room had been alive. The laughter grew. "What's that? A museum piece?" Martinez, one of the louder recruits, leaned forward. "Hope he doesn't hurt himself." But something in the way the man moved silenced the range officer. Normally, he would have stepped in, told the civilian to clear out, scolded the recruits for their remarks. Instead, he just watched. The man's motions were deliberate. Magazine inserted, slide racked, chamber checked, safety engaged. Every action crisp, economical. No wasted movement. The tremor was still there, yes, but beneath it was precision. Target slid forward at 50 meters. The recruits relaxed, certain of what would happen. He raised the pistol. For a moment the muzzle wavered. Someone laughed again. Then his breathing slowed, his grip locked. The tremor vanished. The first shot cracked through the range, sharp and controlled. When the target reeled back, there was no scattered hole, no near miss, just a perfect mark, dead center. A few chuckles died away. He fired again and again. Each shot landed with surgical accuracy. The Colt barked steadily in his hands, but his rhythm was flawless. Fire, reset, sight, fire. By the 5th shot, the recruits had fallen completely silent. By the 10th, they were leaning forward, straining to see through the haze of cordite smoke. When the magazine emptied, he locked the slide back, laid the Colt flat, and called the target in. The paper returned, punctured by a grouping so tight it looked like one hole, torn open by repeated precision at the exact same point. Nobody said a word. The man reloaded. This time he set the target to 100 meters. His limp hadn't stopped him, and his shaking hands hadn't betrayed him. The recruits waited, silent now, not to see him fail, but to see what would happen next. He fired the second string. The result was the same. Tight surgical groupings, far beyond what even the best of them had managed during qualification. Martinez, the one who had mocked him first, muttered under his breath, "That's not possible." The range officer said nothing. His eyes narrowed, something like recognition flickering there. The man reloaded once more. This time, he spoke, his voice low, gravelly, controlled. "Last string." The recruits leaned forward. The target slid downrange again, this time all the way to 200 meters, a distance most shooters wouldn't even attempt with a pistol. A hush fell over the room. He raised the Colt. His hands still trembled until he locked into stance. Then everything stilled, as if the years melted away, as if this was not an old man at a range, but a soldier returning to something familiar. The Colt barked, once, twice, a full magazine. When the target returned, the recruits pressed close. No wild shots, no wasted rounds, all inside the rings, not a single stray. It wasn't perfect, but at that distance, it was a display none of them could match. Silence lingered. Every man there understood instinctively. This wasn't luck. This wasn't show. This was skill earned in places they couldn't imagine. Finally, one recruit whispered the question hanging in the air. "Who is this guy?" The man didn't answer. He simply holstered the Colt, eyes distant, as though looking not at the recruits, not even at the target, but at something far away. And for the first time, the recruits began to understand. This wasn't a demonstration. It was a reminder. The recruits gathered close as the last target slid back on the wire. No one spoke. The grouping on the paper didn't look like random shots. It looked like geometry. Too precise to be luck, too deliberate to be practice. The old man, Sergeant Daniel Rourke, as the roster had listed, was already packing his Colt 45 back into its case. He moved slowly, his limp dragging one leg slightly behind the other, but his hands were steady now. No shake, no hesitation. For the recruits, it was a contradiction they couldn't process. Minutes earlier, they'd been laughing. Now, they were watching in silence, like students who suddenly realized the man at the front wasn't a visitor, but a teacher. Martinez, the loudest voice in the room, finally broke. "Sir, that was... how the hell did you do that?" Rourke snapped the latches on his case shut, then looked up at him. His voice was low, steady, and carried a weight that made the range officer straighten unconsciously. "I aimed. I hit." It wasn't an explanation. It was dismissal. But then Reed, the quiet one, observant where the others were loud, noticed something. As Rourke lifted the bag, the zipper shifted just enough to reveal a patch sewn inside. The colors were faded almost to nothing, but the design was unmistakable, a skull and dagger surrounded by a wreath. Reed froze. He'd only seen it in old manuals. Recon, Vietnam era. He swallowed, then asked carefully, "Were you first recon, sir?" The old man's eyes flicked to his, sharp for the first time all day. Then, after a long pause, he gave the smallest nod. "Long time ago." That was all. No story, no detail, just confirmation. But the silence that followed was heavier than any lecture. The recruits didn't laugh anymore. They didn't even move. They just stepped back as Rourke limped toward the exit, each step slow, deliberate. The range officer, usually quick to dismiss civilians, said nothing. His gaze followed Rourke with a kind of recognition, a respect he didn't extend to many. Before the door closed, Rourke stopped. Without turning back, he spoke once more. "Remember this. The target never cares if your hands shake, only if you hit it." Then he was gone. That night, Reed couldn't let it go. He sat in the dim light of the barracks common room, laptop open, coffee untouched. He searched databases, scrolled through grainy photos, read declassified reports buried under layers of bureaucracy. Hours passed before he found something. After Action Report, March 1971. Laos Reconnaissance Patrol ambushed. Severe casualties, extraction compromised. Final note, surviving sergeant carried 2 men to safety under fire. Refused evacuation until last. Casualties listed. Remaining files sealed. No name, no commendation, just the facts, stripped bare. Reed leaned back staring at the screen. The limp, the silence, the Colt, it all fit. He checked again. Unit rosters, casualty reports, many names redacted, but one kept surfacing. Staff Sergeant Daniel Rourke. Service record incomplete. Sections blacked out. Reed closed the laptop slowly, realizing the truth. The man they had mocked wasn't just a veteran. He was one of those names no one talks about, the ones whose records end in ellipses. The recruits arrived early. Lane 12 was empty, the wire swaying slightly from air currents. His name was still on the roster, but his bench sat untouched. "Think he'll come back?" Martinez asked quietly. No one answered. Even the range officer seemed different that day, more serious, more measured. He didn't scold them for whispering. He didn't need to. The silence itself was enough. When the buzzer sounded, they fired their own strings. But none of their shots felt the same anymore. Every miss reminded them of the man who hadn't missed. Every shaky grip reminded them of the man whose hands shook, until they didn't. Later that week, Reed found something else. A newspaper clipping, barely digitized, from 1974. It mentioned a small ceremony at a base in California. A photo showed a group of men receiving commendations. At the edge of the frame stood Rourke, younger, upright, eyes sharp. No caption, no name. Just another face lost in a crowd. That was the last trace. After that, nothing. His record ended. His story disappeared, and the recruits realized the truth that gnawed at them long after. They had mocked a man who had done more in silence than most would ever do in uniform. Weeks passed. Lane 12 stayed empty. Some swore they saw his name disappear from the roster one morning, but no one could confirm it. All that remained were the whispers, the limp, the colt, the impossible grouping at 200 meters, and the line he had left them with. The target never cares if your hands shake, only if you hit it. For the recruits, that became more than advice. It became a warning, a reminder, a story they would tell again and again. But the real story, the one hidden in after-action reports and sealed files, was left unfinished. And maybe that was the point.